Welcome to your storytelling. Enjoy the stories, and don't forget to subscribe. I never imagined he could hide such a dark secret from me, but I found out the hard way. It all started innocently enough. Our life was perfect, or so I thought. Our home was cozy, our love seemed unshakable, and my husband, Jason, was everything I had ever wanted. But something was off. A few months ago, I stumbled upon an old book in the attic while looking for something I thought I'd misplaced. The book was covered in dust, almost as if it had been hidden away for years. The cover, a deep shade of red, had a strange symbol on it, an intricate design that seemed to shimmer faintly. I didn't think much of it at first, but my curiosity kept gnawing at me. There was something about it that didn't sit right. Jason had never mentioned it before. I picked it up and dusted it off, wondering where it came from. When I opened it, I found a collection of handwritten notes in the margins, notes that seemed more like instructions than anything else. As I flipped through the pages, a wave of unease washed over me. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the writing seemed eerily familiar. I recognized the handwriting. It was Jason's. This book. It meant something to him. But what? And why had he never mentioned it? Later that night, I confronted him about the book. His reaction was immediate, a forced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It's just something I picked up a long time ago. Nothing important. He tried to brush it off, but I could tell something was wrong. His eyes flickered nervously, a tiny crack in his calm exterior. I pressed him further, asking why it had been hidden away, but all he gave me was a vague answer. He didn't want to talk about it. Something was off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was lying. That night, as I lay awake, my mind raced with possibilities. What was he hiding? Why had he been so evasive? I had always trusted him, my perfect husband, but now I wasn't so sure. There were cracks in the foundation, and I couldn't ignore them any longer. I needed to know the truth, no matter how unsettling it might be. The next morning, I decided to do something I had never done before. I snooped. I knew it wasn't healthy, but I couldn't help myself. I needed answers. If Jason wasn't going to give them to me, I would have to find them on my own. I started with his phone, the one thing that was always by his side. He was so careful with it, always locking it, even though I had never had reason to suspect anything before. I had seen him using it late at night, a quiet exchange of messages that he quickly closed whenever I entered the room. I told myself it was nothing, but now, with everything that had happened, I couldn't help but think there was more to it. So, when he left for work one morning, I seized the opportunity. I grabbed his phone from the kitchen counter, my heart pounding as I unlocked it with the passcode he never thought I'd guess. What I found made my blood run cold. Hidden deep within the phone was a thread of messages, exchanges that spoke in a cryptic code I couldn't decipher. The names and numbers weren't familiar to me. These weren't just texts between friends or work colleagues. No, these were secret conversations, private exchanges that seemed to carry weight. One name kept appearing. The order. My pulse quickened as I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it all. Who or what was the order? I dug deeper into his messages, my mind racing with possibilities. As I scrolled through the conversations, I found references to meetings, locations that didn't exist on any map, and phrases that seemed to hint at something far darker than I was prepared to confront. One message caught my eye. The ritual is set for Friday night. We need him ready. I shuddered as I read it over and over again, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was reading. Was Jason involved in something dangerous? What kind of ritual? When Jason returned home that evening, I pretended nothing had changed. I didn't let on that I had discovered his secret, but the unease inside me had only grown. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had uncovered only a small part of the truth. And what scared me more than anything was that I wasn't sure I wanted to know what the rest of the story was. Days went by in a haze. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had found on Jason's phone. The messages, the secret group. What were they planning? The more I thought about it, the more questions I had, and the more I realized that I wasn't just worried anymore. I was terrified. The life I thought I knew was unraveling, and I didn't know how to stop it. I began to notice little things, things that now seemed like clues, signals that Jason was hiding even more from me. His late nights at work had become more frequent, and his answers to my questions were becoming more vague. It was as though he was slipping away from me, and I was powerless to stop it. One evening, while he was out, I decided to confront him head-on. I wasn't going to let this go any longer. I had to know what was happening. I searched the house, looking for any other signs, anything that could give me more insight into the mystery of his involvement with this group. That's when I found it, the key. It was tucked away in his coat pocket, a simple metal key with no markings, but something about it felt important. I held it in my hand, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't for our house, I knew that. It didn't fit any of our locks. So, where did it belong? The next day, I followed him. I knew it was risky, but my need for answers outweighed my fear. I waited until he left for work, then slipped out the door behind him, staying far enough back so he wouldn't notice. It wasn't long before he pulled into a secluded area, a place I had never seen before. I parked my car a distance away and followed on foot, my heart racing. Jason led me to an old, run-down house that looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. He stood outside for a moment, looking around before unlocking the door with the key I had found. My stomach twisted as I watched him disappear inside. What was he doing there? What was so important about this house? I waited, unsure of what to do next. I knew I couldn't just stand there, but I couldn't walk away, either. I had to know the truth. As I crept closer, my mind was flooded with worst-case scenarios, but nothing prepared me for what I saw when I looked through the window. Inside, a group of people were gathered, all dressed in dark, flowing robes. They chanted in unison, their voices low and eerie. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel it in my bones. But it wasn't just the strangers that caught my attention, it was Jason. He stood at the front of the group, his face solemn and unreadable. He was one of them. I was frozen, unable to look away. I had just witnessed something I couldn't unsee. When I finally returned home, I was a wreck. My mind was reeling, my heart in turmoil. Jason wasn't just a part of the order, he was one of them. And what frightened me even more was that he had been hiding this from me, from everything we had built together. How could he keep this secret for so long? Was I married to a stranger? I tried to shake the images from my mind, but they clung to me, haunting me. The robes, the chanting. It all felt like something out of a nightmare. But this was real, and I couldn't pretend otherwise anymore. I had to face the truth, no matter how painful it was. I waited for Jason to come home, my emotions swirling inside me. I had to confront him. I couldn't keep living in this lie. When he walked through the door, I couldn't hold back any longer. "Jason," I said, my voice shaking with anger and fear. "I know what you've been hiding. I saw it with my own eyes." He froze, his face going pale as the color drained from his features. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he whispered. "I didn't want you to be involved." I stepped closer, my voice trembling. "Involved in what? What is the order? What are you a part of?" He didn't answer right away, as if weighing whether to tell me the truth or keep me in the dark. Finally, he sighed and lowered his head. "I'm not just a member," he admitted quietly. "I'm one of the leaders." The shock hit me like a physical blow. My knees nearly buckled beneath me, but I managed to stay upright. "You're a leader? What does that even mean? What are they doing, Jason?" His eyes filled with regret. "I've been a part of this for years, and I didn't want you to know. But now they want you too." I was paralyzed. My heart was racing, my mind spinning. How could he say this? How could he be a leader in something so dark, so dangerous? The man I loved, the man I had trusted with everything, had been living a double life. I didn't know who he was anymore. I demanded answers, but Jason seemed so lost, so trapped in his own world. He told me that the Order had been manipulating him, using him for their own gain. And now, they wanted more. They wanted me. He begged me not to get involved, not to ask questions. But it was too late. I was already in too deep. The more he explained, the more I realized just how dangerous this group was. The Order wasn't just a cult. They were a powerful force with influence in politics, business, and law enforcement. They had their hands in everything. And now, they were closing in on me. As the days passed, Jason became more distant, more withdrawn. I could see the toll this secret life had taken on him. He had become a shell of the man I married, and I didn't know how to help him, or if I even could. I didn't know what to do. My mind was overwhelmed with questions, but Jason's explanation only seemed to make things worse. As much as he insisted that the order was dangerous, his continued involvement was just as terrifying. I had always thought of him as my protector, the one person I could rely on. But now he seemed just as much a prisoner of the group as anyone else. It wasn't just about secrets anymore. It was about survival. He begged me not to leave, but I couldn't stay in the dark any longer. The more Jason told me, the more I realized how deep this went. He spoke of rituals and ceremonies, of dark powers they worshipped, and the dangerous lengths the group was willing to go to achieve their goals. The idea of being part of something so sinister turned my stomach, but it was clear that Jason didn't know how to break free. He had become part of something far bigger than us, and his loyalty to the order seemed unshakable. I sat there, my hands trembling as I processed everything he had shared. The man I had known, the man I had married, was now a stranger. I couldn't recognize him anymore. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered, my voice broken. "I wanted to, but I couldn't," Jason replied, his voice filled with regret. "If I had, you would have been in danger. You still are." That was when the reality of it hit me. The danger wasn't just a distant thought. It was real, and it was closing in on us. The days that followed were a blur. Jason's confession only deepened the chasm between us. I didn't know who to trust, how to move forward. He had asked me not to get involved, but I couldn't sit idly by. The Order wasn't just some strange cult. It was a dangerous, influential organization, and I had to find a way out of it. I couldn't let Jason's fears dictate my life, but the more I tried to resist, the more I felt like I was suffocating in this web of secrecy. Jason's warnings lingered in my mind, but so did my own resolve. If I didn't take matters into my own hands, who would? I knew there had to be something I could do, something to expose the truth before it was too late. The only problem was that Jason had already made it clear. Leaving wasn't an option. The group's grip on him was far too strong. He was tied to them, and his refusal to leave only made the situation worse. I started researching everything I could find about the Order. Their influence was insidious. They had members in positions of power, politicians, CEOs, even police officers. Every lead I found only led to more questions, but nothing concrete. They had covered their tracks well. Still, I couldn't stop. I had to know the truth, even if it meant uncovering more about Jason's dark past than I was prepared to handle. It was on one of my late-night research sessions when I stumbled across a connection I wasn't prepared for. There, buried deep in an online forum, I found a thread that mentioned a specific event, a ritual that the Order had conducted years ago. The event seemed like an ordinary gathering at first, but as I dug deeper, I realized it wasn't. It was the same ritual Jason had referenced in his messages, the one he was preparing for when I confronted him. But there was something else I found, something that made my blood run cold. The thread mentioned my name. It was clear that the Order had been watching me long before I ever knew about them. They had been planning something. They had known who I was all along. I felt my stomach churn. Had Jason been part of all of this from the beginning? Did he bring me into this nightmare intentionally? Had he been using me to further their plans? I couldn't breathe. Every time I thought I was getting closer to the truth, something darker seemed to emerge. And the worst part was, I couldn't trust anyone, not even Jason. Jason noticed the change in me. I wasn't hiding my suspicions anymore. I had seen enough to know that the Order wasn't just some harmless group. It was dangerous. And the more I questioned him, the more his responses seemed to shift, as if he was slipping further away from the man I thought I knew. I started confronting him with everything I had learned, but the answers he gave me were always the same, evasive, filled with half-truths and excuses. But this time, something was different. There was a coldness in his eyes, a distance that had never been there before. One night, I pressed him harder than I ever had before. "Why did you bring me into this, Jason?" I demanded. "Why couldn't you just tell me? You've dragged me into this web of lies, and I don't know how to escape." He looked at me, his face filled with sorrow, but also something else, something I hadn't seen in him before. "I never wanted this for you. he said quietly. "I never wanted to drag you into this mess, but they won't let you go now. You're part of it, whether you like it or not." I froze. Part of it? What did he mean by that? The weight of Jason's words hung in the air like a cloud. You're part of it, whether you like it or not. I couldn't shake the chill that ran down my spine. It was like he was trying to tell me something without actually saying it. What had I gotten myself into? That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the order, its dark, twisted rituals, and the people who were so deep into it that they couldn't see their way out. My husband was one of them, and now I was too. I had to make a choice. Either I walked away, leaving Jason behind, or I stayed and faced whatever came next. But there was no going back now. Even if I tried to leave, the order would find me. Jason had warned me of that. He had told me I was already a part of it, whether I liked it or not. As the days went by, I felt the walls closing in. I couldn't trust anyone anymore. Everyone around me was either complicit or too afraid to speak out. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of the truth and the lies. Jason was no longer the man I married, and I wasn't the woman I used to be either. I had changed. I had been forced into a world I never asked for, and now I had to figure out how to survive in it. But the hardest question remained. Could I save him? Or was he lost forever? I couldn't let go of the thought that maybe, just maybe, I could pull Jason out of this. I couldn't imagine a life without him, even though everything inside me screamed to run far away. But the deeper I delved into the truth, the more I realized how tightly the order had him in their grasp. It wasn't just loyalty anymore, it was fear. They had threatened him in ways that I couldn't even begin to understand, and no matter how much he loved me, he seemed helpless against their influence. The feeling of powerlessness overwhelmed me. I had always seen Jason as my protector, the strong, confident man I could rely on. But now, I saw the cracks in his armor. The man I thought I knew was fading before my eyes, replaced by someone who was desperately trying to maintain control over his life, but losing. He came home late one evening, more withdrawn than ever. I could tell something had happened. His eyes were hollow, his movements sluggish, like he had just returned from a battlefield. I approached him cautiously, afraid that whatever had happened might make him pull further away. "Jason, what happened?" I asked gently, trying not to sound desperate. He looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. "They know you're digging into their past. They know you're close to finding out things that could destroy everything." My heart dropped. What do they want from me? They want you to join them. They want you to become a part of their world, just like me. He looked down, regret written all over his face. "I don't know how much longer I can keep you safe." The fear in his voice was real. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about me. They were watching. Always. And it wasn't just about them knowing my name. It was about them knowing everything about me, everything I cared about. I realized with a sickening clarity that Jason wasn't just afraid of losing me to another man, to another life. He was terrified that I might be their next victim, that I might be sucked into this dark world like so many others. Every conversation with Jason felt like walking on a tightrope. One wrong step, and everything would come crashing down. He was constantly on edge, watching me with an intensity that made me feel like I was being suffocated by his fear. Yet, there was nothing I could do to reassure him. The damage had been done. I was too deep into this to walk away now. As I sifted through more of the documents I had found, I realized that Jason's fear wasn't just unfounded paranoia. It was grounded in something much darker. The Order didn't just control people's lives. They had a way of making sure they never left. Once you were in for life. I started to notice strange things around the house. Phones buzzing at odd hours, mysterious packages left at the door, and the sense that I was constantly being watched. Jason never mentioned them, but I could feel his unease. Every night, I lay awake, wondering if the next knock on the door would be the one that changed everything. Then, it happened. I found a note hidden in the back of one of Jason's old drawers. It was simple, handwritten in a rushed, almost frantic hand. "Don't trust anyone. They're coming for you. Leave now." My heart skipped a beat. Was it from Jason? Or someone else trying to help me? Before I could even process the note, Jason walked into the room. His face was pale, his eyes wide with panic. "What did you find?" he demanded. His voice was almost a growl. I hesitated. "Who left this note?" Jason took a step back, his face contorted with fear. "No one. It doesn't matter. You have to trust me. They're watching." I stood there, paralyzed. The man I thought I knew had become someone unrecognizable. His desperation was palpable, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something big. The tension between Jason and me grew unbearable. Every conversation felt like a battle. Every moment spent together was tainted by the suspicion that he wasn't telling me everything. I had to know the truth, no matter the cost. I decided to take matters into my own hands. Late one night, I snuck into his office. I knew he kept a stash of things related to the orders there. Old files, documents, photos, anything that could shed light on the dark world he was involved in. My heart raced as I rummaged through drawers, pulling out pieces of paper, photos, anything that might offer me the answers I so desperately needed. Then, I found it. A photograph. It was of Jason, but he was younger, maybe in his 20s. He was standing with a group of people, all dressed in dark robes, their faces partially obscured by hoods. But what stood out the most was the symbol they wore. A symbol I had seen in the forums, in the research I had done. It was the mark of the order. My breath caught in my throat. Jason had been in this longer than I had imagined. He wasn't just a member. He was entrenched in it. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but something held me back. Would he even tell me the truth? Or would he deny everything, pushing me further away? I couldn't afford to lose him, but at the same time, I couldn't live a life of lies. I had to choose. The weight of the decision bore down on me. I had always prided myself on being strong, independent, capable of handling any challenge that came my way. But this was beyond anything I had ever faced. I couldn't keep living in this twisted reality where nothing made sense. I couldn't keep loving a man who was so consumed by fear that he couldn't even look me in the eyes without lying. But the thought of losing Jason was unbearable. I loved him. I loved the man I thought I knew. The man who held me when I cried, who promised to protect me, who swore that nothing would come between us. Yet now, it felt like I was drowning in his secrets, trapped in a life I never signed up for. I made the decision then and there. I had to confront him, once and for all. "Jason," I said that evening, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. "I know everything. I know about the order. I know what they've done, and I know what you've been hiding from me." His face turned pale. "You don't know what you're saying." I shook my head. "No, Jason, I do. I just need you to be honest with me. For once." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For a long moment, we stood in silence. Then, he spoke. "I can't leave them, not now. But I'll protect you. I'll keep you safe. Just don't leave me." His words echoed in my mind as I sat in silence, staring at him. I had so many questions, but none of them seemed to matter anymore. The truth had finally come out, but it wasn't the one I was hoping for. I wanted him to tell me everything was going to be okay, that we could leave all of this behind. But instead, he told me to trust him, to believe that he could protect me. How could I trust him now? How could I believe that the man I married was still the same person I had fallen in love with? "I don't know if I can trust you anymore, Jason," I whispered, feeling the weight of my own words. "You've kept this from me for so long. I don't even know who you are anymore." He stepped closer, his hands trembling. "Please, don't say that. I've done things I regret, but I've never stopped loving you. I never wanted to hurt you." The pain in his voice broke something inside me. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that the man I loved was still there, buried underneath the lies and the fear. But I couldn't ignore the reality of the situation. Jason wasn't just a man caught in a bad situation. He was deeply entangled in a dangerous, powerful group, and now, it seemed, there was no way out. "We need to leave, Jason," I said, my voice steady with resolve. "We need to get away from all of this." He shook his head, his face pleading. "I can't. You don't understand. They won't let us leave. They've already marked us. It's too late for us." I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, I knew he was right. We were trapped, and I was just beginning to realize the magnitude of what that meant. That night, I didn't sleep. My mind raced, unable to settle on anything. The walls of our home, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. I couldn't escape. Jason couldn't protect me from the one thing that terrified me most, the truth. I thought about the note I had found earlier, the cryptic message that had warned me. They're coming for you. It had been a chilling reminder that I wasn't just dealing with Jason's past anymore. I was dealing with something far more dangerous, something that was watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. The next morning, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I had to act before it was too late. I knew I couldn't trust Jason to be the one to save us, not because I didn't love him, but because I couldn't rely on someone who was still so deeply controlled by the order. I started researching more, digging deeper into the group's activities, trying to find a way out for both of us. The more I learned, the more I realized how much power they had. It wasn't just about their rituals. It was about their reach, how they manipulated people in positions of power. They had their hands in everything. I wasn't going to let Jason's past destroy us. I would fight for our future, even if that meant taking drastic steps. As the days passed, I could feel the walls closing in. Jason was more distant than ever, his anxiety palpable. Every time the phone rang or the doorbell rang, his eyes would flick to the door, as if expecting someone to come for us. And then, one night, it happened. The doorbell rang. I froze. Jason immediately stood up, his face pale, and rushed to the door. I followed him, my heart racing in my chest. When Jason opened the door, I saw a man standing on the other side. He was tall, with a stern expression, wearing a suit that screamed authority. His eyes were cold, calculating. "This is a mistake," Jason said, his voice barely a whisper. The man didn't say a word at first. He just stepped forward, pushing Jason aside. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and dangerous. I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't a casual visit. This was something else, something far more dangerous. The man turned his eyes on me, his gaze sharp. "You've been asking questions. You need to stop." I didn't back down. "Who are you?" I demanded. "I'm someone who can make things very difficult for you," he replied coldly. "If you know what's good for you, you'll forget about everything you've learned. If you don't, well, let's just say things will get much worse." My heart pounded in my chest. The threat was clear. "Who are you working for?" "The Order," he said, his lips curling into a sinister smile. "And you need to leave Jason alone. He belongs to us." Jason stepped forward, but the man held up a hand, stopping him. "You've already done enough damage. You need to come with me." I saw the terror in Jason's eyes. He was being dragged back into the darkness, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The man's visit left me shaken to the core. I couldn't believe what had just happened. Jason had been marked, but I had been marked too, simply by loving him. The door slammed shut behind us, and as we stood there in silence, I knew things would never be the same. Jason was different now. He was no longer the man I loved. He was something else, a man trapped in a world that controlled every aspect of his life. He turned to me, his eyes pleading. "I told you this was dangerous. I warned you." "You didn't warn me enough," I said, my voice trembling with anger and fear. "How could you let this happen? You've dragged me into this nightmare." His eyes were full of regret, but it didn't matter now. The damage was done. "We can't escape, can we?" I asked softly. Jason shook his head, tears in his eyes. "No, not anymore. We're both part of this now, and they'll never let us go." The days that followed were suffocating. I tried to go on with my life, pretending everything was normal, but it was impossible. Jason's secret life was no longer just a shadow. It was a constant presence, looming over us. Every time I glanced at him, I saw the weight of everything he had hidden, and it broke my heart. The man from the Order had left, but his words echoed in my mind. "You belong to us." What did that even mean? What kind of grip did they have on Jason? What would they do to us if we tried to leave? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every knock on the door, every unfamiliar face in the street, made me jump. I knew they were out there, somewhere, waiting for us to make a move. Jason became more paranoid by the day, his eyes darting around the house, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. Then one evening, Jason's phone buzzed, its shrill ring cutting through the tense silence of the room. He froze, his hand trembling as he reached for it. I saw the name on the screen, and my stomach churned. It was the same man who had visited us. Jason answered the call, his voice low and strained. Yes? I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see the fear in his eyes as he spoke. Whatever was happening, it was bad, really bad. When he hung up, he didn't look at me. He just stood there, motionless, as if he had already made his decision. "We have to leave," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Leave," I repeated, not sure I understood. "Where? How?" "The order," he began, looking away. "They're coming for us. They want us to leave the country, go somewhere they can control us." "Jason, you can't be serious," I said, shaking my head. "We can't run away. We need to confront this. We need to get out of this mess." But Jason's expression was firm. "We can't fight them, not like this. The only way to protect you, to protect us, is to disappear." I wanted to argue, to tell him that running was giving up, but something in his eyes stopped me. There was no fight left in him, no defiance. He had already been beaten down by this group, and the last shred of hope he had was now tied to leaving everything behind. The idea of running terrified me, but a small part of me understood why it might be our only option. The man's visit, the threats, the way Jason had been broken down. It was all too much. Maybe Jason was right. Maybe we had no choice but to disappear. But leaving meant more than just running away from the order. It meant leaving behind everything we had built together. Our home, our friends, our lives. It felt like we would be abandoning everything we ever cared about, as if all the love, the memories, the shared moments had been meaningless. How do we even start? I asked, my voice shaky. How do we disappear? Jason was already packing, pulling clothes into a suitcase, his movements mechanical. "We get new identities. We go underground. There are people who can help us." I watched him work, feeling a growing sense of dread. Was this really the man I had married? The one who had promised me a future, a life without fear? Now, everything felt like it was slipping away, and the man I loved seemed more like a stranger than ever. "I don't want to run," I said softly, my voice breaking. "I want to fight for us, for our life together." Jason paused and looked at me, his face twisted with pain. "I wish we could, but fighting them, it'll get us killed. I can't lose you, not like that." The words hit me hard. Jason was so afraid of them, of losing me, that he had already given up. And now, it was up to me to make the decision. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "We don't run. We face this together." Jason's eyes widened, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of hope. "You're willing to stay?" I nodded. "I'm willing to fight for us. We can figure this out." Jason's shoulders slumped in relief, but I could see the doubt still gnawing at him. "You don't know what you're asking for," he said, his voice tight. But I did know. This wasn't just about us anymore. It was about reclaiming our lives, about taking back what we had lost to the order. We spent the next few days planning, each moment filled with a sense of urgency. Jason had contacts, people he had once trusted, who might be able to help us. But we knew we couldn't go to the authorities, not without risking everything. The order was too powerful, too connected. If we turned to the wrong person, it could be the end of us. Every step felt like a calculated risk, and the tension in our home grew unbearable. We couldn't even trust our own walls anymore. Every time I opened the blinds, I half expected to see a figure watching from across the street. I had become someone I didn't recognize, paranoid, anxious, afraid of every shadow. But I wasn't going to back down. Jason left one morning to meet with an old friend. He told me to stay inside and lock the doors, to not answer the phone, to stay out of sight. He had been given a meeting time, a place where we could hopefully get some help. The hours stretched on, each minute feeling longer than the last. I tried to keep my mind busy, focusing on everything I had to do, everything we needed to survive. But when the doorbell rang that afternoon, my heart stopped. I glanced at the clock. Jason was supposed to be back by now. I opened the door slowly, my hands trembling. And there, standing in front of me, was someone I hadn't expected. "Is Jason here?" the man asked, his voice smooth but carrying an edge of something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't the man from the order, but the look in his eyes told me he was no friend. My heart raced as I stared at the man standing in front of me. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket, his eyes sharp and calculating. There was something about him that set my nerves on edge, something I couldn't quite explain. I don't know who you are," I said, my voice shaky. "What do you want?" His lips curled into a tight smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just here to deliver a message," he said, his voice low and controlled. "You need to come with me." I felt a chill run through me. This wasn't a casual visit. This was a threat. "Where's Jason?" I demanded, my voice trembling. The man didn't answer, instead stepping closer to me, his presence imposing. "Jason's fine," he said, "but we need to talk. There's no time to waste." I instinctively stepped back, closing the door behind me. "I'm not going anywhere with you. Who are you working for?" He didn't flinch, just stood there, staring at me with those cold eyes. "I'm with them," he said, his words sending a wave of dread crashing over me. "The order. And you don't want to make this harder than it needs to be?" I felt my stomach drop. I had been expecting something like this, but the reality of it hit me like a ton of bricks. "The order?" I whispered, barely able to breathe. He nodded, the smile never leaving his face. "We've been watching you. Watching both of you. And it's time you realized just how deep you are in." My mind raced, my pulse pounding in my ears. I had been so careful, hadn't I? But clearly, it hadn't been enough. "What do you want with me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The man leaned in, his gaze locking onto mine. "It's not about what we want. It's about what you'll do when the time comes. We've already given Jason a choice. Now it's your turn." I was confused, terrified, but something in his words struck a nerve. "What choice?" I asked, my voice barely above a breath. "Doesn't matter," he said, backing away. "What matters is that you understand the situation. You're both in too deep now. There's no going back." Before I could react, he turned on his heel and walked away, leaving me standing in the doorway, trembling. The man's visit had left me reeling, and Jason still wasn't home. I paced the house, my mind whirling with questions, with fear. What had he meant by a choice? What choice did Jason have to make, and how was I involved in all of this? I didn't know what to do anymore. Every time I thought I understood our situation, it became even more complicated. The deeper I went, the more I realized how little control we actually had. Jason had been right all along. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about both of us. And we had no way out. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Jason walked through the door. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He looked like he had aged a decade in the past few days. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice tight. I went to meet someone," he replied, his words coming out in a rush. "I don't know who they are, but they told me things I didn't want to hear." I took a step toward him, my heart pounding in my chest. "What did they tell you?" Jason hesitated, his gaze flickering nervously. "They told me that if we don't comply, if we don't play along, they'll make things much worse for us. For you." The words hit me like a slap in the face. I had been so focused on the threat against us that I hadn't realized just how far this group's influence stretched. "Jason, we can't just give in," I said, my voice firm. "We can't let them control us." But Jason's expression darkened, and he looked away. "I don't know what else to do, okay? They have our lives in their hands. We have no choice." I took a step back, feeling the weight of his words sink in. The reality was sinking in fast, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep fighting. "Jason, please," I pleaded, my voice breaking. "There has to be a way out. There has to be something we can do." He shook his head, his eyes filled with sorrow. "I wish there was, but I don't think we can escape them. Not now. Not when they've already started making their move." The fear in his eyes was enough to make my heart break. Jason had always been the strong one, the protector, but now he was broken. And so was I. The next few days were filled with a strange kind of numbness. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched at every turn. I had never been so aware of every noise, every movement. It felt like the walls were closing in on us, and there was nowhere to run. Jason spent most of his time on the phone, speaking in hushed tones to people I didn't know, trying to arrange things that I couldn't even understand. I hated the feeling of being left in the dark, of being kept out of the loop, but I knew I had to trust him. He was doing what he thought was best for us. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how we had gotten here. How had our lives spiraled so far out of control? How had I ended up in this nightmare? But the answers were too elusive, too complicated. Every time I thought I had figured it out, another twist would appear. And now, with Jason looking more and more like a man who had given up, I didn't know what to believe anymore. That's when the doorbell rang again. I held my breath, praying it wasn't another visit from the order. Jason had warned me not to open the door for anyone, but the fear of what might happen next kept me frozen in place. I slowly stood, my knees trembling, and made my way to the door. When I looked through the peephole, I couldn't believe my eyes. It was a familiar face, someone I hadn't seen in years. I couldn't believe my eyes. Standing on the other side of the door was someone I never expected to see again. Sarah, my best friend from years ago, the one I'd lost touch with after Jason and I moved. Sarah, why was she here? And why now? My heart raced as I hesitated, unsure whether to open the door. Was she connected to the order? Was she part of whatever dark world Jason had been sucked into? I stared through the peephole, trying to make sense of it all. I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. Finally, I opened the door, keeping the chain on. Sarah? I whispered, my voice barely audible. She looked just the same, except her eyes. They were different, darker, tired. She wasn't the carefree friend I remembered. Hey, she said softly, as though she didn't want to startle me. Can I come in? We need to talk. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. Something hidden, like she knew more than she was letting on. Why are you here? I asked, still suspicious. She glanced over her shoulder, as if checking to see if anyone was watching, before stepping inside. She shut the door behind her with a quiet click and turned to face me. I'm not here to cause trouble, she said quickly, raising her hands in a placating gesture. But I think you need to hear this. I know things about the order. Things you don't want to find out the hard way. My blood ran cold. How do you know about them? I asked, barely able to keep my voice steady. Sarah lowered her gaze, then whispered, I was involved with them years ago. My stomach dropped, the weight of her words hitting me like a brick. You? I gasped. But why? How? I didn't have a choice, Sarah said, her voice shaking with the emotion she tried to hold back. They have ways of making people do things they don't want to. They got to me too. I stepped back, trying to process what she was saying. Sarah had always been strong-willed, independent. She was never someone to be controlled. But hearing her now, seeing the fear in her eyes, I knew she was telling the truth. They got at Jason too, didn't they? She asked, her voice softer now. I nodded, the lump in my throat growing. He's trying to protect me. But I don't know how much longer we can survive this. Sarah took a deep breath. That's why I'm here. I can help you. But you have to trust me, and you have to be ready for what's coming. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, mixed with uncertainty. Could I really trust her again after so long? Could I trust her in a situation as dangerous as this? I don't know if I can, I said, shaking my head. This is too big, Sarah. Too dangerous. She stepped forward, grabbing my hands in hers. Please, I know how this works. I know what they'll do to you both if you don't fight back now. I can help you get out. But you have to make a decision, and you need to make it soon. I stood there, looking into her eyes, searching for the person I had once known. The Sarah I remembered was strong, fearless. But the woman standing in front of me, was she still the same person? But one thing was clear. She had answers. She knew things I didn't. I don't have much time, Sarah continued. If we don't act fast, Jason will be lost to them for good. And you'll never see him again. The threat was real, and the weight of it settled like a stone in my chest. Okay, I said finally, my voice trembling. Help me. But we're doing this together. We fight this together. Sarah nodded, her expression grave. Together. The days that followed were a blur of frantic preparations. Sarah was right. We didn't have time to waste. We had to act fast, and we had to be smart. Jason and I couldn't just run anymore. We couldn't hide in the shadows. If we were going to survive, we had to fight back, and we had to do it now. Sarah brought in people I didn't recognize, trusted contacts, she said. People who had once been part of the order and had managed to escape. They were determined to help us, but they made it clear. This wouldn't be easy. If we went up against the order, we were risking everything. There would be no turning back. I've been where you are, one of the men said. His face was grim, his voice rough with experience. They'll come after you with everything they have. They have eyes everywhere, ears everywhere. They don't lose. But neither do we. Jason had been quiet, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a fierce determination. It was like he had finally realized that running was no longer an option. He was done hiding. You're sure about this? I asked him one night, as we sat in the dim light of the living room, the tension thick in the air. He turned to look at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and resolve. We don't have a choice anymore. If we stay silent, they'll win. And I won't let them take you away from me. I reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. Then we fight. And that was the decision that sealed our fate. The plan was simple, but dangerous. We were going to go straight to the heart of the order, to their headquarters, wherever that was, and confront them. But we had no idea how big or how powerful they truly were. They had been pulling the strings for so long, manipulating everyone, including Jason. Now it was our turn to turn the tables. The contacts Sarah had connected us with were experts in infiltration, in breaking and entering, in going unnoticed. They gave us new identities, new clothes, and helped us prepare for the mission ahead. We would go in quiet, gather what we needed, and expose them. But the closer we got to our goal, the more I realized just how far the order had infiltrated everything. Politics, businesses, even law enforcement. Every corner I turned, I wondered if I was walking into a trap. Would we survive this? Could we even make it out alive? There was only one way to find out. We spent the next few days preparing in silence, as if the weight of the situation had made us mute. Sarah's contacts worked tirelessly, arranging the logistics, providing us with fake credentials, and teaching us everything we needed to know about the order and their operations. It felt like a dream, or more accurately, a nightmare. Every piece of the puzzle only revealed more darkness, and every step forward seemed to take us deeper into the abyss. But one thing kept me going, Jason. He had changed since the moment Sarah arrived. There was fire in his eyes again, and though the fear still clung to his every movement, he no longer felt like a man cornered. He was fighting back. I don't know if we'll make it out of this, he said one evening, his voice quiet as we sat in the dimly lit kitchen, sharing a cold meal. But we have to try. We have no other choice. I nodded, trying to suppress the fear gnawing at my insides. We'll fight. Together. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure if I believed it. I had spent so much of my life pretending everything was okay, avoiding the truth, burying the things I didn't want to see. But now the truth was here, right in front of me, and I couldn't ignore it. The morning of the mission came too quickly. My heart raced as we prepared to leave the house. Jason's hand tightened around mine as we walked through the door, our only escape route now a web of deception and lies. I thought about everything that had led us here. The lies, the secrets, the people we had trusted, and the world we had unknowingly entered. Jason had been a part of something bigger than us, something that threatened to destroy everything we'd built. But he was finally choosing to fight back. It was time. We arrived at the location Sarah had given us, a nondescript office building in the middle of the city, surrounded by more buildings, all of them seemingly identical. But there was something different about this one. There was a heaviness in the air, a sense of foreboding that made my skin crawl. This is it, Sarah said quietly, her eyes scanning the surroundings. Everything we've been working toward. We can't go back now. Jason and I exchanged a look. I wasn't sure if it was determination or fear in his eyes, but I knew one thing. We were in this together. We entered the building, blending in with the few employees heading inside. But as we passed the elevators, we were stopped by a man who didn't look like he belonged to this building. His presence was too deliberate, his eyes too calculating. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice calm, but there was an edge to it. I could feel Jason stiffen beside me, but he stayed silent. My heart pounded in my chest. The man was too observant. He knew something wasn't right. "We're just here for a meeting," Jason said, his voice steady, though there was a tension in his shoulders. The man looked at us for a moment longer than was comfortable, as though sizing us up. Finally, he nodded, his expression unreadable. "All right, take the elevator to the 5th floor." I swallowed hard as we continued walking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The entire building felt like a trap, like it was designed to make us feel small, insignificant, and vulnerable. When the elevator doors closed behind us, I felt the weight of our decision settle over me. There was no turning back. The 5th floor was eerily quiet. We stepped out into a sterile hallway, the faint hum of fluorescent lights above us the only sound. I couldn't shake the feeling that every step we took was being observed. Jason's grip on my hand tightened, and I could see his jaw clenched in concentration. "Are you sure we're in the right place?" I whispered, the anxiety creeping into my voice. Jason nodded, but I could see doubt in his eyes. "This is where they said to meet. We need to be ready for anything." As we approached the door at the end of the hallway, I noticed the small security camera mounted above it, its lens unblinking. I wasn't sure if we were being filmed, but the knowledge that someone was watching made my skin crawl. Jason reached for the door handle, but before he could turn it, the door swung open, and a man stepped out, tall, dressed in a sharp suit, and holding a clipboard. His face was calm, but there was something about his demeanor that made my stomach twist. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, I presume?" he asked, his voice smooth and polite, but there was something off about it. I looked at Jason, but before either of us could say anything, the man stepped aside, gesturing for us to enter. "Please, come in," he said, his smile cold and professional. I felt a surge of panic rising in my chest. This wasn't what we had planned. Something felt wrong, but Jason stepped forward, pulling me along behind him. As we entered the room, I couldn't help but notice the absence of windows, the sterile white walls, and the low hum of the air conditioning. It felt like we were walking into a holding pen. "Take a seat," the man said, motioning to 2 chairs across from a desk. He sat down, his eyes never leaving us. Jason and I sat, exchanging a brief, uncertain glance. "We've been expecting you," the man said, his voice low. "You've made the right choice coming here. But now you have to understand that there's no turning back." The words hung in the air like a warning, and for the first time, I wondered if we had made the biggest mistake of our lives. The man's words lingered in the air, heavy and ominous. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest as he continued to watch us, his expression unreadable. It was like we had stepped into a world we didn't fully understand, a world where everything was calculated, controlled, and planned. Jason shifted in his seat, his jaw tight, but he didn't speak. Neither of us did. The man wasn't making any effort to break the silence. "We've been watching you for a while," he said after what felt like an eternity. "You're both very curious. But curiosity comes with a price." I couldn't hold back my frustration. "What do you want from us?" My voice was sharp, though a part of me was trembling with fear. The man smiled, like he knew something we didn't. "What we want, Mrs. Carter, is simple. We want you to understand that we're here to help. Your husband made a decision, a choice to join us. And now, you'll have to decide if you want to be part of the bigger picture." Bigger picture? What was he talking about? Jason hadn't made any choices. He had been dragged into this. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. We weren't in control anymore. Jason looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and resolve. "This is my mess," he said quietly, "but I'm trying to fix it." I didn't know how deep this went until it was too late. I could see the anguish in his eyes. This was the man I had married, the man who had been swept up into something far bigger than he could handle. And now we were in the middle of it, caught in a web we didn't understand. The man across from us didn't seem fazed by our silent exchange. Instead, he leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. You're in this now, whether you like it or not. But you're not alone. We'll guide you. All you have to do is follow the rules. Rules? I scoffed. What kind of rules are we talking about? He tilted his head slightly, as though amused by my reaction. Rules that will ensure your safety. Rules that will help you understand the power you're now part of. It hit me. This wasn't about helping us. This was about control. They were playing a game, and we were their pawns. I leaned forward, my voice firm. I don't want to be part of this. I just want to get out. I want my husband back. The man's smile faded slightly, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something else in his eyes. Anger, maybe. Or was it something more? You don't understand, he said, his voice lower now. You think you have a choice. But once you've been touched by us, there's no going back. You're in this for life, whether you want to be or not. My breath caught in my throat. What does that mean? What have you done to my husband? Jason stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Stop, he said, his voice shaking. Just stop. The man didn't flinch, but he stood as well, towering over us. You need to accept reality. Your husband is ours. You will be too, eventually. It's just a matter of time. I felt the walls closing in on me. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't something we could escape. But Jason wasn't going down without a fight. I'm not yours, he said through gritted teeth. I will never be yours. The man's expression hardened, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped back, as if considering something. Finally, he spoke. We'll see about that. You both will have a choice to make, sooner than you think. I looked at Jason, the fear settling deep in my bones. Could we really fight this? Or were we already too far gone? We left the office, our heads spinning with everything the man had said, but we didn't have the luxury of time to process it all. We needed answers, and we needed them fast. The drive back to our place was tense, the silence between Jason and me thick with unspoken words. He was gripping the wheel so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and filled with frustration. I had no idea how bad this was. I thought it was just a club, a way to find something I was missing. But now I see how far this goes. How deep they're in everything. I looked at him, my heart breaking. This wasn't the man I had married. The Jason I knew was strong, unwavering. But now he was lost, consumed by something much larger than either of us could have ever imagined. Do you want to be part of this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jason didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on the road, the weight of my question pressing down on him. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked with emotion. I don't know, but I know one thing. We can't just walk away from this. We have to make sure they don't control us. I reached over, placing my hand on his. Then we fight. Together. Jason nodded, his grip on the wheel loosening slightly. Together. We knew it wouldn't be easy. But as long as we had each other, maybe we stood a chance. That night, we sat in silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something big. The man at the office had made it clear. There was no turning back. As I lay in bed, my mind raced with everything we'd learned. Jason had been drawn into this cult by something he couldn't even understand, and now, everything was spiraling out of control. But I refused to give up on him. I refused to let this darkness take over our lives. The next morning, I woke up to an empty bed. Jason was gone. My heart skipped a beat when I realized Jason wasn't beside me. Panic surged through me as I rushed out of the bedroom, calling his name. The house was eerily quiet. I checked the kitchen, the living room, nothing. I ran to the front door, and to my horror, it was unlocked. I pulled it open, my breath catching in my throat. Outside, there was no sign of him, just an empty street and the cold morning air. Jason, I whispered to myself, but there was no answer. I grabbed my phone, dialing his number over and over, but it went straight to voicemail. My hands shook as I left him a message, hoping he would hear it and come back. Please, I said, my voice trembling. Where are you? Please come back. I paced back and forth, trying to figure out where he could have gone. There was only one place I could think of, the office building. the place where everything had started to unravel. Maybe he'd gone there to confront them. Without thinking, I grabbed my coat and rushed out the door. I wasn't going to let them take him from me. Not without a fight. The drive to the office building felt like it took forever, my mind spinning with fear and confusion. What had Jason gotten himself into? Had he been lured deeper into the cult? Or had he gone there to make one final stand? When I arrived at the building, I parked across the street and watched it for a few minutes, trying to gather my thoughts. There were no signs of anything unusual, just the normal bustle of the city. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening behind those closed doors. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever might come next. I couldn't let Jason face this alone. I wouldn't. I crossed the street and headed toward the entrance, but as I approached, I noticed a familiar face standing by the door. It was the man from the office, the one who had greeted us earlier. He saw me before I could turn away. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice smooth and calculated. "I was wondering when you'd come looking for him." My stomach dropped. "Where is he?" I demanded, my voice shaky but firm. "What have you done to him?" The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Nothing yet. But you have to understand, Mrs. Carter, this isn't just about him anymore. It's about you too. You've crossed a line, and now there's no turning back." I felt a cold chill run down my spine as his words sank in. This was more than I had ever imagined. It wasn't just about Jason anymore. It was about me too. "Where is he?" I repeated, my voice louder this time, the desperation creeping in. The man didn't answer right away. He simply stepped aside, motioning for me to enter the building. "He's inside. If you want answers, you'll have to come with me." I hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside, my pulse racing. This was it. I was about to learn everything, or lose everything. We walked down the sterile, dimly lit hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. The air was thick with tension. Every step I took felt like I was moving closer to something I wasn't prepared for, but I couldn't stop now. The man led me to a room at the far end of the hall. It was a simple office, but the atmosphere felt heavy, like it was suffocating me. Inside, Jason was sitting at a desk, his head bowed, his expression unreadable. "Jason." I rushed toward him, but the man caught my arm, stopping me before I could reach him. "You're not allowed to touch him just yet," the man said coldly. I shot him a glare but didn't fight him. Instead, I turned to Jason, my eyes searching for any sign of the man I loved. "Jason, what's happening? What did they do to you?" Jason looked up slowly, his eyes meeting mine. There was a strange emptiness in them, a coldness that sent a chill through my bones. "They didn't do anything to me," he said, his voice distant. I'm here because I have to be. I made a choice." I shook my head, disbelieving. "No, Jason, you didn't. You didn't have to do this. We can leave. We can get away from all of this." He stared at me for a long moment, and then, almost as if he was seeing me for the first time, his face softened. "I can't leave, not now. You don't understand. They have power. Real power." I felt my heart break as I realized the depth of what had happened to him. This wasn't just about control. It was about something much darker, something that had taken hold of him in a way I couldn't begin to comprehend. "You're not alone in this," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We can fight them together." Jason looked away, his face filled with guilt. "I wish I could believe that, but I'm too far in. You don't know how deep this goes." The man from the doorway stepped forward then, his expression smug. "He's right. There's no going back for either of you. But that doesn't mean it's too late to be part of something greater." I stared at him, fear mingling with anger. I would not let them take Jason from me, not without a fight. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't let them manipulate us any longer. This had gone too far. Jason was lost in their world now, but I wasn't, and I refused to be. As I looked at him one last time, I made a silent promise to myself. I would get him back. I would do whatever it took, but I had to be smart. I couldn't just rush in and fight blindly. I needed a plan. Before I left the room, I turned to the man. "This isn't over," I said quietly, but firmly. He just smiled, as though he already knew how this would play out. As I walked out of the building, my mind was racing. The man's smug smile was still haunting me. I knew Jason was deep in this, but I couldn't let him slip further into their control. Not without a fight. I needed to be smart, strategic. I drove home in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel with a tension that wouldn't release. I couldn't stop thinking about what Jason had said, that he was too far in. What did that even mean? Had they brainwashed him? Or was it something deeper? At home, the silence was unbearable. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the phone, wondering whether to call him again. I didn't want to appear weak, desperate, but I had no other choice. I had to reach him. I dialed his number once more, my fingers trembling. This time, it rang. Hello? Jason's voice came through the line, but it wasn't the voice I recognized. There was a coldness to it, a distance. Jason, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's me. Where are you? Please talk to me. There was a long pause. I'm sorry, he finally said, his words clipped. I can't do this right now. I felt my heart sink. What do you mean? You can't. You're my husband. We can work through this. Please let me help you. Another pause. I don't know how you can help me. I'm not the man you think I am anymore. I've changed. My breath caught in my throat. Jason, no. You're still you. You're just lost right now. I'll find a way to get you back, I swear. His voice was almost imperceptible as he said, It's too late. Don't try to save me. Before I could say another word, the line went dead. I couldn't sleep that night. Jason's words echoed in my mind, and the weight of his final statement crushed me. Don't try to save me. How could he give up on everything so easily? He wasn't lost. He was just trapped. And I would find a way to pull him out, no matter the cost. I spent the next few days trying to gather as much information as I could about this sect. I knew they were powerful, but I didn't know how far their influence stretched. It was hard to get a solid lead, though. The more I dug, the more elusive they became. But then I found something. A small clue hidden deep within a network of underground forums. Someone had posted about a meeting, a gathering of members in a secluded location. It was risky to pursue it, but it was my only lead. I spent hours preparing, gathering everything I might need. I had to be careful. One wrong move, and I might end up trapped in their world too. But I had no choice. I packed a bag and slipped out of the house when the sun was just beginning to set. The meeting place was a secluded cabin in the woods, miles away from any signs of civilization. I arrived under the cover of darkness, my nerves on edge. It felt like I was walking into the lion's den, but I couldn't back down now. I crept toward the cabin, the trees around me casting long shadows. I could hear voices from inside, low murmurs, almost like chanting. They were waiting for something, or someone. I hid behind a large oak tree and watched as people entered the cabin, one by one. It was clear that these were the same people I had seen before. The man who had spoken to me in the office was here too, standing near the entrance, his expression unreadable. My heart pounded as I tried to make sense of everything. Was Jason inside? Had he been coerced into this meeting, or was he willingly participating? I had to know. I waited until the last of the members entered, and then I made my move. Slowly, I crept toward the cabin, moving as quietly as possible. My breath caught in my throat as I reached the door. I could hear the chanting more clearly now, but it didn't sound like anything I recognized. It wasn't religious. It was something else, something unsettling. I pushed the door open slightly, just enough to peek inside. What I saw made my stomach churn. Jason was there, but he wasn't the Jason I knew. He was standing in the center of a circle, his face blank, his eyes distant, as if he were in some kind of trance. Around him, others were gathered, their eyes closed as they chanted in unison. I gasped, but immediately clamped my hand over my mouth to stifle the sound. I had to be quiet. I had to think. My hands shook as I crouched behind the tree, trying to process what I had just seen. Jason wasn't just attending the meeting. He was part of it, fully immersed. And the others, they weren't just followers. They were changed. The chanting continued, and I could feel an oppressive energy filling the air. It wasn't just some harmless group activity. It was something dark, something dangerous. I had to get Jason out of there. I watched as one of the members, a woman, approached Jason, placing her hand on his shoulder. He didn't react. He didn't even flinch. It was like he was completely numb, a shell of the man I had once loved. Tears stung my eyes as I realized how far gone he was. This wasn't just about control. It was about erasing who he was, turning him into something else entirely. But I couldn't lose him, not like this. I had to act. Now, my pulse raced as I formulated a plan. The door was barely cracked, and the dim light from inside spilled out into the night. I couldn't just barge in. There were too many of them. But I had to get close enough to reach Jason, to pull him away from this madness. I crouched low and moved silently through the trees, staying in the shadows. The chanting grew louder, and I knew that time was running out. I had to make my move before they noticed I was there. As I neared the door, I saw an opening, a gap between two of the members. I could slip inside, unnoticed, and get to Jason. My heart raced as I took a deep breath and bolted forward. I made it through the door without anyone noticing, and once inside, I pressed myself against the wall, hidden in the shadows. My eyes locked on Jason. He was still in the center of the room, his eyes glazed over. He didn't even seem to recognize me. My throat tightened as I whispered his name. Jason. There was no response. I took a step closer, my hands trembling. Jason, please. You have to hear me. His gaze flickered slightly, but it wasn't the warm, familiar gaze I had known. This was cold, distant. He wasn't truly there. I reached out, touching his arm gently. Come back to me, I pleaded. For a moment, there was nothing. But then, almost imperceptibly, his body tensed. His fingers twitched. Jason, I said again, firmer this time. This isn't you. This is not who you are. He slowly turned his head toward me, his expression unreadable. Why are you doing this? I whispered. Please, remember who you are. Remember us. His lips parted, but before he could speak, one of the cult members, a tall man with a stern expression, stepped forward. You shouldn't have come here. His voice was cold, almost threatening. I turned to face him, standing between him and Jason. I'm taking him home. The man sneered. You don't understand, do you? He's made his choice. And so have you. I felt my heart sink, but I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not when Jason was so close to breaking free. I reached for Jason again, desperate. Please, Jason, come with me. We can leave together. For the briefest moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes, a flash of recognition. But then it disappeared, replaced by the cold emptiness again. Let him go, I demanded, my voice stronger now. The man stepped closer, blocking my path. You have no idea what you're up against. You think you can just walk in here and take him? You can't. This is bigger than you. I wasn't going to let him intimidate me. I'm not leaving without him. The tension in the room was suffocating. I stood between Jason and the cult member, my heart pounding in my chest. Every instinct told me to fight, to push forward, but I couldn't afford to make a wrong move. Jason was still standing there, looking at me with vacant eyes. He hadn't responded. Not really. I didn't know if it was too late, if he had truly become lost to this cult, or if there was still a chance to save him. I took a deep breath. Jason, I whispered again. I know you can hear me. I know you're still in there. Fight this. Please. The man in front of me gave a small, mocking laugh. You think you can't save him? He's beyond saving. He's already chosen his path. I wasn't sure if it was defiance or desperation that drove me, but I wasn't going to give up. Not now, not when Jason was so close. I stepped forward, slowly, keeping my eyes on Jason. The man tried to block me, but I was determined. I didn't care if I was outnumbered. I was going to take Jason home. I reached for Jason's hand. Please, I begged, my voice shaking. Come back to me. You're not alone in this. Jason's hand twitched, and for a fleeting second, his expression softened. A flicker of recognition, of the man I loved, flashed in his eyes. But then, just as quickly, it vanished. His hand fell limp in mine, and his gaze hardened again. I could see the struggle in him, the battle between the man I knew and the darkness this cult had placed in him. Jason, you're still you. I whispered, my heart aching. I believe in you. Please, fight this. But before I could say anything more, the cult member stepped forward once more, grabbing my wrist. "You need to leave," he hissed. "Now." I looked at Jason one last time, my heart breaking. "Please, Jason, don't let them control you." But he didn't respond. And as the cult member began to pull me away, my heart shattered. I had failed. I woke up the next morning in a daze. My mind was numb, and my body ached. I had returned home after the confrontation, but the night felt like a blur. Jason's face, his vacant expression, haunted me. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the phone in my hands. I had to do something. I couldn't let this be the end. I knew the stakes were higher now. They had a hold on him, and they wouldn't let him go without a fight. But I couldn't give up. I had to find a way to reach him, to pull him out of whatever grip they had on him. The days following that night felt like a slow descent into despair. Jason was slipping further away, and no matter what I tried, I couldn't reach him. He wasn't answering my calls, and every time I managed to track him down, he seemed distant, detached from everything we had. I couldn't just give up. I refused to. But the cult was getting more insidious, and their control over him was tightening. I was losing him, piece by piece, and it was like watching someone drown right in front of me, unable to pull them from the water. That afternoon, as I sat in the living room trying to think of my next move, I received an unexpected message on my phone. It was an encrypted email. No sender, just a cryptic subject line. "They're watching you." I hesitated, unsure if it was some kind of trick, but my curiosity got the better of me. I opened the email, my heart pounding as the message inside was brief, but chilling. "Don't trust the ones who claim to be your allies. Your husband is deeper into this than you realize. The truth is more dangerous than you can imagine. The only way to get him back is to confront the leader." I felt a chill run down my spine. The leader? Who were they talking about? Was there someone behind all this, pulling the strings? And what truth were they referring to? My mind raced as I read and reread the email, trying to make sense of it. But the more I thought about it, the more certain I became of one thing. I had no choice but to follow this trail. Whoever had sent this message might be my only hope of saving Jason. I immediately started looking for any lead on the leader. This was my only shot. I couldn't fail. The next few days were a blur of research and secretive phone calls. I couldn't trust anyone, not even close friends, because I didn't know who was involved in the cult. But the information I was uncovering painted a horrifying picture. The leader of the sect was someone I had never heard of, a man named Elias. According to the few sources I could find, Elias had a reputation for being a charismatic but ruthless manipulator. He wasn't just the head of the cult. He was the one who controlled its very core. I found an old interview with him online, a video from years ago, and as I watched it, I felt my stomach churn. He had this unnerving calm about him, a practiced charm that seemed almost hypnotic. It was clear that he wasn't just a man. He was a force. Everything I had learned pointed to the fact that Jason's involvement wasn't accidental. This wasn't just a group he had stumbled into. Elias had specifically chosen him, which meant the level of control was far more deliberate than I had imagined. I had to meet him. The email had said confronting the leader was the only way to save Jason, and if that was the only way to bring him back, then I had no choice. I spent the next few days gathering information about Elias's whereabouts. I had to be careful, too many risks, and I could walk straight into their trap. But in the end, I found an address, an isolated mansion on the outskirts of the city, where Elias was believed to be staying. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I made my decision. I was going to confront him. I stood outside the mansion, my heart hammering in my chest. This place was too quiet, too perfect. It felt like stepping into a dream, or maybe a nightmare. The grand estate was nestled at the edge of a forest, with tall iron gates surrounding it. Everything about this place screamed power, and it terrified me. I had no idea what I was walking into. I couldn't afford to hesitate. Jason was on the line, and I couldn't back down now. I approached the gate, my mind racing. As I pushed it open, the sound of metal against metal echoed in the silence. I felt like every step was being watched, like the walls themselves were closing in on me. When I reached the door, I knocked. Once, twice, and then waited. A few moments later, the door creaked open. A tall man stood in front of me, his face impassive. "Are you Elias?" I asked, my voice trembling despite myself. He smiled, a thin, cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I am. What do you want?" I took a deep breath. "I need to talk to you. I need to see my husband." Elias stepped aside and gestured for me to enter. "Of course. We've been expecting you." I swallowed hard, but I stepped through the door, unsure if I was walking into the mouth of a lion. Inside, the mansion was even more unsettling. It was immaculate, almost sterile, with large, looming paintings on the walls that seemed to watch my every move. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel it in my bones. Elias led me through a series of hallways that seemed to go on forever, his every step deliberate and measured. "Your husband is here," he said, his voice smooth, almost rehearsed. "But he's not who you think he is." I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my composure. "What have you done to him?" Elias's smile deepened, but there was no warmth in it. "What I've done is give him freedom. Freedom from the lies you've been living. He understands now, and soon you will too." I wasn't sure what he meant by that, but something about his words made my skin crawl. We stopped in front of a large door. Elias turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "Are you ready to face the truth?" he asked. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The door opened, and I stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, and I could hear the soft hum of music in the background. But it wasn't the atmosphere that stopped me in my tracks. It was Jason. He was sitting in a chair in the center of the room, his eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't look up when I entered, didn't even acknowledge my presence. I moved toward him slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. "Jason," I whispered. He didn't respond. I reached for his hand, but as soon as my fingers brushed his, he pulled away sharply. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice flat. "You should leave." Tears welled up in my eyes as I stared at him. "What happened to you? Why are you saying this?" He finally looked up at me, and there was nothing in his eyes but emptiness. "I'm not the man you think I am," he said softly, "and I'm never going back."